Was she poisoned by a serpent, or was she murdered? She ruled Egypt for 2 decades, seduced 2 of Rome's most powerful men, and nearly became empress of the known world. But everything you think you know about Cleopatra might be a lie. History's most famous Egyptian queen wasn't even Egyptian. In the year 51 before Christ, an 18-year-old young woman ascended to the throne of Egypt in a world dominated by men. Her name would echo through the centuries, Cleopatra VII Philopator, not for her legendary beauty, but for her extraordinary intelligence, fierce ambition, and unparalleled political skill. When Cleopatra took power, Egypt was the richest kingdom in the Mediterranean, with wealth built over thousands of years. Rome, an ambitious republic expanding its reach, had its hungry eyes fixed firmly on Egypt's grain, gold, and strategic position. The young queen would need every bit of her cunning to navigate these dangerous waters. What most people don't realize is that Cleopatra was actually Greek, descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals who seized Egypt after Alexander's death. While her ancestors had ruled as pharaohs for nearly 3 centuries, they remained culturally Greek, rarely bothering to learn the Egyptian language. Cleopatra broke that tradition. She spoke Egyptian fluently, along with at least 6 other languages. She understood something fundamental about power. To rule a people, you must speak to them in their own tongue. Imagine this: a brilliant young woman raised in the most sophisticated court of the ancient world, surrounded by intrigue, assassination attempts, and the constant threat of Roman invasion. Her own siblings plotted against her. In the royal tradition of the Ptolemaic dynasty, she was forced to marry her younger brother, a political arrangement that would eventually erupt into civil war. Today, we're going to uncover the true story of Egypt's last pharaoh, beyond the myths created by Hollywood and Roman propaganda. We'll explore how this remarkable woman nearly changed the fate of the ancient world through sheer force of intellect and will. If you love history and want to unravel the mysteries of the great empires like this video, subscribe to Legacy of Empires and don't miss a single episode. Let's dive into the life of one of the most fascinating rulers of antiquity, a woman who challenged Rome itself and almost won. Here's something that might shock you. Cleopatra, the most iconic Egyptian queen in history, didn't have a single drop of Egyptian blood flowing through her veins. The woman whose image we associate with ancient Egypt, her face adorning countless movies, books, and artworks, was actually Greek to her core. Cleopatra was a direct descendant of Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's most trusted Macedonian generals. After Alexander's death in 323 before Christ, his vast empire was divided among his generals, and Ptolemy claimed the rich prize of Egypt. Thus began a dynasty of Greek rulers in the land of the pharaohs that would last for nearly 3 centuries. By the time Cleopatra was born in 69 before Christ, her family had ruled Egypt for 275 years without truly becoming Egyptian. Imagine that, nearly 3 centuries of Greek pharaohs ruling over Egyptian subjects while maintaining their separate Greek identity. They lived in Alexandria, a distinctly Greek city on Egypt's Mediterranean coast, spoke Greek at court, worshipped Greek gods alongside Egyptian ones, and married within their own family to keep their bloodline pure. What made Cleopatra extraordinary among her dynasty was her genuine interest in the land she ruled. While her ancestors barely bothered to learn the local language, considering themselves superior to their subjects, Cleopatra mastered ancient Egyptian, a complex language with over 700 hieroglyphic symbols. She also spoke Ethiopian, Hebrew, Arabic, Syrian, Median, Parthian, and of course her native Greek. Think about it. In an age without language learning apps or formal education systems, she mastered at least 8 languages. Cleopatra was the first and only ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty who could actually speak directly to her Egyptian subjects without translators. She understood that true power comes not just from military might or royal decree, but from connecting with the people you govern. This linguistic talent wasn't just impressive, it was revolutionary political strategy. When she ascended to the throne at 18 years old in 51 before Christ, Egyptian tradition required her to have a male co-ruler. The unfortunate reality of her situation meant she had to share power with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was just 10 years old at the time. And following the disturbing but established tradition of the Ptolemaic dynasty, she was forced to marry this child brother. Yes, you heard that correctly. Her own brother became her husband. These brother-sister marriages were common practice among the Ptolemies, who borrowed the tradition from earlier Egyptian pharaohs. They believed it kept royal power concentrated and preserved their Greek bloodline. Cleopatra's own parents were likely siblings or close relatives. To our modern sensibilities, this practice seems unthinkable, but in the ancient world, particularly among royalty, such arrangements were political moves rather than romantic unions. The marriage was purely ceremonial, of course. Ptolemy XIII was still a child, but it created a deeply uncomfortable power dynamic. Cleopatra, intelligent and ambitious, found herself legally bound to a boy, being manipulated by power-hungry court advisors who saw the young queen as a threat. These advisors, particularly the eunuch Pothinus and the general Achilles, effectively controlled the young Ptolemy and worked tirelessly to undermine Cleopatra's authority. Within just 3 years of this uneasy co-rulership, Cleopatra would be forced to flee Alexandria, expelled by her own brother's supporters. But as history would soon show, underestimating this Greek woman on the Egyptian throne would prove to be a fatal mistake for many who stood in her way. The fragile power-sharing arrangement between Cleopatra and her brother-husband Ptolemy XIII couldn't last. A vicious civil war erupted between them, fueled by court officials who found the young queen far too independent and ambitious for their liking. By 48 before Christ, Cleopatra found herself exiled from Alexandria, her own capital city, fleeing for her life with just a small group of loyal supporters. Everything she had, her throne, her royal status, her very life, hung by a thread. And then, as if the gods themselves had intervened, a middle-aged Roman general landed in Egypt, Julius Caesar. Caesar hadn't come to Egypt for Cleopatra. He was pursuing his Roman rival Pompey, who had fled to Egypt after losing their civil war. The Egyptians, thinking they would curry favor with Caesar, had already executed Pompey and presented his severed head to the Roman general, a miscalculation that disgusted rather than pleased Caesar. Now Caesar found himself in Alexandria, in the middle of an Egyptian civil war he had no interest in resolving. He set up quarters in the royal palace and summoned both Ptolemy and Cleopatra to appear before him to settle their dispute. This is where one of history's most famous seductions unfolds. While Ptolemy could freely enter the palace, Cleopatra faced certain death if she tried to return to Alexandria. The city was controlled by her brother's forces, and she would be killed before ever reaching Caesar. So what did she do? According to the famous legend, Cleopatra devised an audacious plan. She had herself rolled inside a large carpet, though some historians believe it was actually a linen sack or bedding bag used for traveling. Picture this extraordinary scene. As darkness fell over Alexandria, a small merchant boat slipped into the harbor. A loyal servant of the queen, some accounts say it was her trusted advisor Apollodorus the Sicilian, hoisted a large rolled carpet onto his shoulders and walked directly toward the heavily guarded royal palace. Guards stopped him, of course, but he simply stated he had a delivery for the Roman general, a gift from a local merchant. They let him pass. Imagine the guards' faces if they had known that hidden inside that rolled carpet was the exiled Queen of Egypt herself, curled up in darkness, gambling everything on this one desperate move. The servant carried his precious cargo through corridors and antechambers until he reached Caesar's private quarters, and there, with a dramatic flourish, he unrolled the carpet. From within emerged the 21-year-old Cleopatra, Not the Hollywood beauty we imagine, but something far more formidable. A fiercely intelligent woman with an extraordinary gift for languages, theatre, and political calculation. She stood before the 52-year-old Caesar, the most powerful man in the world, ready to play the highest stakes political game of her life. What many historians believe is that it wasn't her beauty that seduced Caesar, though she was undoubtedly charismatic. Rather, it was her keen political mind, her vast cultural knowledge, and her mastery of languages, including the ability to speak to Caesar directly in his native Latin. While most foreign royals needed translators, Cleopatra could engage Caesar in sophisticated political conversation. She understood Roman politics nearly as well as she understood Egyptian and Greek affairs. Caesar saw in her not just an exotic lover, but a strategic ally with a legitimate claim to the Egyptian throne and control of Egypt's vast grain supplies, which Rome desperately needed. Remember, Egypt was the breadbasket of the Mediterranean world, and whoever controlled its grain had enormous leverage over food supplies throughout the region. Together, Caesar and Cleopatra outmaneuvered her brother's forces. When fighting broke out in Alexandria, Caesar's smaller force found itself besieged in the palace district. The famous Library of Alexandria caught fire during these battles, though contrary to popular belief, only a portion of its scrolls were destroyed, not the entire library. The war reached its climax when Ptolemy XIII, still just a teenager, drowned in the Nile while trying to escape after a decisive battle. Some stories say he sank under the weight of his golden armor, a poetic end for a young pharaoh who never truly ruled. With her brother dead, Cleopatra reclaimed her throne. She now had to marry her even younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, who was about 11 years old at the time, to maintain the appearance of traditional co-rule. But there was no question who truly held power in Egypt. Caesar remained in Egypt far longer than Roman business required, 9 months in total. During this time, Cleopatra became pregnant. She later gave birth to a son she named Ptolemy Caesar, though he was commonly called Caesarion, meaning Little Caesar. While Caesar never officially acknowledged the boy as his son, he didn't deny it either, and Cleopatra boldly proclaimed the child to be the son of Julius Caesar. When Caesar finally returned to Rome, he brought Cleopatra and their infant son with him as honored guests. Imagine the scene: Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, sailing up the Tiber River on a magnificent royal barge, accompanied by hundreds of attendants and enormous wealth. She was installed in Caesar's own villa across the Tiber, a scandalous arrangement that shocked conservative Romans, who were appalled to see their leader openly living with a foreign queen while still married to his Roman wife, Calpurnia. In Rome, Cleopatra wasn't just Caesar's exotic mistress, she was a political statement. Her presence demonstrated Caesar's growing power and his increasingly monarchical ambitions. The man who had crossed the Rubicon and seized control of the Republic was now consorting with a foreign queen who ruled as a living goddess in her homeland. For Romans who feared Caesar wanted to become king, a title despised in Roman political tradition, Cleopatra's presence seemed to confirm their worst fears. Little did anyone know that this political chess game between a Roman general and an Egyptian queen would ultimately reshape the fate of two empires and echo through history for the next 2,000 years. In Rome, Cleopatra caused nothing short of a sensation. Imagine the scene: a foreign queen who ruled as a living goddess in her homeland, now installed in Julius Caesar's private villa across the Tiber River. The conservative Roman elite were absolutely scandalized. This wasn't just any foreign visitor, this was the Queen of Egypt, living openly as the mistress of Rome's most powerful man. To make matters even more provocative, Caesar had a golden statue of Cleopatra erected in the Temple of Venus Genetrix, the goddess from whom Caesar claimed his family descended. Think about the audacity of this move. In a deeply religious society where temples were sacred spaces, Caesar placed a statue of his foreign lover alongside the divine. He was essentially elevating Cleopatra to the status of a goddess in Rome itself. For traditional Romans who prided themselves on their republican values and disdained the idea of monarchy, this wasn't just politically troubling, it was blasphemous. Roman senators and aristocrats watched with growing alarm as Caesar accumulated titles and honors. He had been named dictator for life. He sat on a golden throne. He appeared in purple robes traditionally associated with kings. And now, this foreign queen at his side seemed to confirm their worst fears, that Caesar intended to transform the Republic into a monarchy with himself as king and possibly Cleopatra as his queen. We'll never know if that was truly Caesar's intention, because on the Ides of March, the 15th of March in 44 before Christ, a group of senators led by Marcus Brutus and Cassius conspired to assassinate him. They stabbed Caesar 23 times on the floor of the Senate, believing they were saving the Republic from tyranny. Cleopatra was still in Rome when her protector was murdered. She had been living there for nearly 2 years, hosting lavish parties, showcasing Egyptian luxury, and undoubtedly engaging in political negotiations. With Caesar's bloody assassination, her position became incredibly dangerous overnight. The queen, who had been untouchable as Caesar's companion, was now vulnerable to his enemies. Without wasting any time, Cleopatra gathered her entourage and fled Italy, returning to the safety of Egypt with her young son Caesarion. She understood that in the power vacuum left by Caesar's death, her child, who she claimed was Caesar's only son, would be seen as a threat by whoever seized power in Rome. And she was absolutely right. The stakes of this political game were, quite literally, life and death. Back on her throne in Egypt, Cleopatra moved swiftly to eliminate any threats to her rule. Her younger sister Arsinoe had previously attempted to seize power during the Alexandrian War, even leading troops against Caesar's forces. After Caesar's victory, Arsinoe had been captured and taken to Rome, where she was paraded in chains during Caesar's triumph, but ultimately spared and exiled to the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus. Cleopatra wasn't willing to let this potential rival live. In a cold demonstration that she would shed family blood to protect her crown, she persuaded Mark Antony, Caesar's former right-hand man who now shared power in Rome, to have Arsinoe executed at the temple where she had been granted sanctuary. Even sacred asylum couldn't protect Arsinoe from her sister's determination to eliminate all threats. This ruthless elimination of her own sister reveals something crucial about Cleopatra that often gets lost in the romantic legends. She was not just a seductress or a victim of circumstance. She was a calculating ruler who made brutal decisions when necessary. In the ancient world, especially in the royal courts of the Hellenistic kingdoms, family members were often the greatest threats to a monarch's power. Cleopatra's own family history was filled with parents, siblings, and relatives murdering each other for the throne. Her elimination of Arsinoe, while shocking to us today, was standard procedure in the cutthroat world of ancient politics. With her internal enemies removed and her position in Egypt secure, Cleopatra turned her attention back to Rome, where a massive power struggle had erupted after Caesar's death. The fate of her kingdom, and perhaps her ambitions for a greater empire, would depend on picking the right side in the coming Roman civil war. Did you know that Cleopatra wasn't actually the stunning beauty that Hollywood films portray her as? The truth about her appearance is going to surprise you in just a bit. If you're enjoying this video so far, be sure to like it, share it, and subscribe to Legacy of Empires for more incredible historical deep dives. And tell me in the comments, do you think Cleopatra truly loved her Roman lovers, or was she simply playing the power game? Was she a romantic or a ruthless strategist? Maybe a bit of both? Let me know what you think. After Caesar's assassination, the Roman world plunged into chaos. Power struggles erupted across the Republic as various factions fought to fill the vacuum left by the fallen dictator. Eventually, two men emerged as the primary contenders: Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and legal heir, and Mark Antony, Caesar's former right-hand man and most trusted general. These two powerful figures reluctantly formed an alliance along with a third man named Lepidus, creating what historians call the Second Triumvirate. They hunted down and executed Caesar's assassins, then divided the Roman world between themselves. Octavian took Rome and the western provinces, while Mark Antony claimed Egypt and the wealthy eastern territories. For Cleopatra, this reshuffling of Roman power presented both danger and opportunity. She needed Roman protection to maintain Egypt's independence, but which Roman leader should she support? She had carefully cultivated her relationship with Caesar, but now needed a new, powerful ally. When Mark Antony, now master of the Eastern Mediterranean, summoned her to meet him in Tarsus in 41 before Christ, she saw her chance to place another bold bet in the game of imperial politics. Antony's summons wasn't friendly. He suspected Cleopatra had supported his enemies during the recent civil conflicts and wanted to question her loyalty. He expected her to come quickly and submissively, as other Eastern rulers had done. But Cleopatra understood something essential about power and theater. An impression made is sometimes more important than words spoken. So what did she do? She deliberately delayed her arrival, making Antony wait. And then, when she finally decided to appear, she orchestrated one of the most spectacular entrances in political history. Imagine the scene at Tarsus. Antony, the powerful Roman general, was holding court in the bustling port city. Suddenly, word spread that an extraordinary vessel was coming up the river Cydnus. The entire city rushed to the riverbanks to witness what appeared to be a floating palace gliding through the water. It was a massive gilded barge with purple sails that billowed in the breeze, giving off exotic perfumes that could be smelled from the shore. Silver oars rose and fell in perfect rhythm, moving in time with flutes, lyres, and pipes that played enchanting music. At the helm stood sailors dressed as cupids, while beautiful young women costumed as sea nymphs and goddesses managed the ropes and tiller. And there, reclining under a gold-spangled canopy on the deck, was Cleopatra herself, dressed as Aphrodite, the goddess of love. She was surrounded by beautiful attendants dressed as Graces and Nereids, some fanning her, others burning incense that wafted its sweet scent across the water to the awestruck crowds. The Roman biographer Plutarch tells us that the local population was so mesmerized by this display that Antony found himself sitting alone at his tribunal in the marketplace. Everyone else had run to the harbor to see the Egyptian queen's arrival. When Antony sent an invitation for her to dine with him, Cleopatra replied that he should come to her instead. And remarkably, he did. This was masterful political theater. Before a single word of negotiation was spoken, Cleopatra had established herself not as a vassal queen begging for Roman favor, but as Antony's equal, perhaps even his superior in wealth, culture, and magnificence. She demonstrated that Egypt, though politically dependent on Rome, was culturally and economically its rival. Unlike Caesar, who had maintained Cleopatra as something of a secret, keeping her across the Tiber, away from his official residence, Mark Antony fell completely, publicly, and recklessly in love with the Egyptian queen. Their relationship rapidly evolved from political alliance to passionate romance. The timing was particularly problematic because Antony had recently married Octavia, the sister of Octavian, as part of a peace treaty between the triumvirs. This Roman marriage was meant to cement the fragile political alliance between Antony and Octavian. By abandoning Octavia for Cleopatra, Antony wasn't just following his heart. He was committing a serious political blunder that gave Octavian perfect ammunition to use against him. After their meeting in Tarsus, Antony followed Cleopatra back to Egypt, where he spent the winter of 41 to 40 before Christ in Alexandria, living as her consort rather than as a Roman official. The city's residents nicknamed him the Dionysus, linking him to the Greek god of wine and revelry, while Cleopatra was known as the new Isis, associating her with Egypt's most beloved goddess. Together, they formed a drinking club called the Inimitable Livers, hosting elaborate feasts and celebrations. Stories of their extravagance became legendary, including a tale where Cleopatra dissolved a priceless pearl in vinegar and drank it to win a bet about who could host the most expensive dinner. But their relationship wasn't just about romance and revelry. They formed a genuine partnership, with Cleopatra providing Antony the wealth he needed for his military campaigns, and Antony offering Cleopatra the Roman protection Egypt required to maintain its independence. Over the next decade, they had 3 children together, twins named Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and later a 3rd child named Ptolemy Philadelphus. These children represented something unprecedented, a potential dynasty that might unite East and West, combining Roman military might with Egyptian wealth and Hellenistic culture. This dream of a new kind of empire became explicit during a lavish ceremony in Alexandria in 34 before Christ, known as the Donations of Alexandria. There, in the great gymnasium of the city, seated on golden thrones with their children beside them, Antony made dramatic proclamations that reshaped the political map of the East. He declared Cleopatra Queen of Kings, and her son Caesarion the true son and heir of Julius Caesar. He gave their twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, rule over vast territories including Armenia, Media, Parthia, Cyrenaica, Libya, and portions of Cilicia. To their youngest son, Ptolemy Philadelphus, he granted Syria and Phoenicia. This was an astonishing political gamble. Antony was essentially creating a new dynasty and redistributing Roman territories to Cleopatra's children without the Senate's approval. He was acting not as a Roman magistrate, but as an Eastern monarch, a king making kings and queens. For Romans already suspicious of Antony's relationship with Cleopatra, this was the final straw. Octavian, a master of propaganda, seized the opportunity to paint Antony as a man bewitched by a foreign queen who had abandoned Roman values and betrayed the Republic. He claimed Antony planned to move the capital from Rome to Alexandria and rule the Roman world from Egypt, the ultimate betrayal in Roman eyes. The stage was now set for the final confrontation between Octavian and Antony, a conflict that would determine not just their personal fates, but the future course of the Roman world and Cleopatra's beloved Egypt. Forget everything you think you know about Cleopatra's appearance. Forget Elizabeth Taylor's violet eyes or Angelina Jolie's famous lips. The Hollywood version of Egypt's last queen bears almost no resemblance to the historical reality. When we look at actual coins minted during Cleopatra's reign, the ancient equivalent of putting someone's face on currency, we see something quite different from our modern imagination. These coins show a woman with a prominent, hooked nose, a strong, jutting chin, and sharp features that would be far from today's Hollywood beauty standards. Her neck appears somewhat thin and sinewy, and her facial expression is severe and determined rather than seductively alluring. Now, ancient coinage wasn't exactly known for flattering portraits. Rulers were often depicted with exaggerated features meant to convey strength and authority rather than beauty. But even accounting for artistic conventions of the time, the Cleopatra on these coins is striking for her distinctive, strong features rather than conventional attractiveness. Does this mean Cleopatra was unattractive? Not necessarily. But it does suggest that the legendary seductress who supposedly enchanted the most powerful men in Rome did so with qualities far beyond physical beauty. The Greek historian Plutarch, who lived about a century after Cleopatra, gives us perhaps the most insightful description of her appeal. He wrote, "Her actual beauty, it is said, was not in itself so remarkable. It was the charm of her presence that was irresistible. Her personality and the fascination of her conversation had such a power that they ensnared everyone who dealt with her." Plutarch goes on to describe her melodious voice, which he compares to a musical instrument with many strings, and her linguistic abilities. He notes that while most foreign monarchs needed translators to speak with the people they governed, Cleopatra could communicate directly in multiple languages. She could switch effortlessly between Greek, Egyptian, Ethiopian, Hebrew, Arabic, Syrian, Median, and Latin, adapting her tone and manner to each cultural context. Imagine the impact this would have had on the men she dealt with politically. Caesar and Antony met many beautiful women in their lives. Rome had no shortage of attractive noblewomen and courtesans. But to encounter a foreign queen who could debate philosophy in your native tongue, discuss astronomy and mathematics at an advanced level, and demonstrate a keen understanding of military and political strategy, that would have been truly extraordinary. Cleopatra was, above all, an intellectual. She studied at the famous Museion, the ancient research institution connected to the Great Library of Alexandria. There, under the guidance of renowned scholars, she immersed herself in mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and medicine. Think about this. While most women of her era were denied formal education entirely, Cleopatra was engaging with the leading scientific and philosophical ideas of her time. She wasn't just a passive consumer of knowledge either. Cleopatra wrote treatises on weights and measures, cosmetics, and even authored a medical text focusing on gynecological issues. One ancient source credits her with a work called Cosmetics for Preserving the Body, suggesting her interest in both beauty treatments and preservation techniques, knowledge that would have connected to Egyptian mummification traditions. As a patron of the Great Library of Alexandria, she supported the work of scholars and ensured the continuation of one of the ancient world's greatest intellectual institutions. Under her patronage, Alexandria remained a center of learning that rivaled Athens, attracting thinkers from across the Mediterranean world. Cleopatra also had deep knowledge of religious traditions. She presented herself to her Egyptian subjects as the living embodiment of the goddess Isis, mastering the complex religious rituals and symbolism that this role required. To her Greek subjects, she was associated with Aphrodite, and when dealing with Rome, she could intelligently discuss Roman religious practices and beliefs. This religious and cultural fluency was another dimension of her remarkable intellect. Far from being merely a femme fatale who used her beauty to seduce powerful men, Cleopatra was one of the most brilliant minds of her era, a polymath queen whose intellectual abilities were her true secret weapon in the dangerous game of ancient politics. Her intelligence manifested in practical ways as well. She was an able administrator who implemented economic reforms, managed extensive building projects, and navigated complex diplomatic relationships. During a time of drought and famine, she opened the royal granaries to feed her people, an act that earned her genuine loyalty. The myth of Cleopatra as primarily a seductress was largely created by her enemy Octavian's propaganda, and then perpetuated through Roman historical accounts written by men from a civilization that was deeply uncomfortable with the idea of female political power. By reducing her to her relationships with Caesar and Antony, they could diminish her own agency and accomplishments. The truth is far more compelling than the myth. Cleopatra wasn't just a beautiful woman who seduced powerful men. She was a multilingual intellectual, a shrewd political strategist, and a capable ruler who fought desperately to preserve her kingdom's independence in a world increasingly dominated by Rome. Her true power lay not in her appearance, but in her extraordinary mind. The final chapter of Cleopatra's remarkable life was written not by her own hand, but by the relentless propaganda machine of her greatest enemy, Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus. Octavian was a master of manipulation, and he knew exactly how to turn Roman public opinion against Mark Antony and Cleopatra. He painted her as a foreign seductress who had bewitched a noble Roman general with exotic charms and mysterious Eastern magic. In the forums of Rome, Octavian would read aloud alleged love letters between Antony and Cleopatra, deliberately inflaming the conservative Roman sensibilities. He spread stories that Antony had become un-Roman, drinking excessively, adopting Egyptian customs, and worst of all, giving away Roman territories to a foreign queen and her children. It was the perfect strategy. Octavian couldn't declare war directly on Mark Antony, a beloved Roman general, without appearing as a power-hungry tyrant himself. But by framing the conflict as Rome versus Egypt, as a patriotic defense against a foreign threat, he gave himself the moral high ground. The Roman Senate declared war not on Antony, but on Cleopatra, the first time Rome had ever officially gone to war with a woman. The decisive moment came in 31 before Christ, at the naval battle of Actium, off the coast of Greece. The combined fleets of Antony and Cleopatra faced Octavian's navy, commanded by his brilliant general Agrippa. What many don't realize is how close this battle came to changing the course of history. Had Antony and Cleopatra won that day, Rome might have transformed into an Eastern-style empire centuries earlier, with Alexandria, not Rome, as its capital. But fate and superior Roman naval tactics decided otherwise. The battle turned against them. In the chaos of the fighting, something unexpected happened. Cleopatra's ship suddenly raised its sails and broke through the Roman blockade, fleeing toward Egypt with her treasure fleet. When Antony saw her ship departing, he abandoned his men and followed her. This moment has been debated by historians for centuries. Was it a prearranged escape plan, a moment of panic, or a strategic withdrawal to fight another day? Whatever the reason, it sealed their fate. Antony's abandoned troops soon surrendered, and Octavian gained control of their vast combined forces. The lovers returned to Alexandria, where they spent their final months in what ancient writers called the inimitable life, a society dedicated to extravagant feasting and pleasure, knowing their end was near. Some historians believe this was actually a suicide pact, where members vowed to die together in luxury rather than face humiliation. Octavian methodically advanced toward Egypt. Antony made a last desperate stand outside Alexandria, briefly rallying when his cavalry won an initial skirmish. But the next day, his fleet and remaining forces defected to Octavian without a fight. Antony watched from the palace as his ships raised their sails in greeting to the enemy. Devastated by this final betrayal, Antony received false news that Cleopatra had already taken her life. In his grief, he fell on his sword, crying out that he, once the greatest general in Rome, had been outdone in courage by a woman. But the report was untrue. Cleopatra was very much alive, having secluded herself in her mausoleum with her treasures. When she learned of Antony's suicide attempt, she had him brought to her. Ancient accounts tell us that Antony, bleeding profusely, was hoisted by ropes through a high window since the doors had been sealed. There, in Cleopatra's arms, he drank one last cup of wine and died. A tragic end for the man who had once been the most powerful soldier in the world. Octavian soon captured Alexandria. He desperately wanted Cleopatra alive, not out of mercy, but because he planned to display her in chains during his triumph in Rome. Such a spectacle, the mighty Queen of Egypt, descendant of the Ptolemies, being paraded through the streets before a jeering Roman crowd, would cement his victory like nothing else. Cleopatra knew this all too well. She had once visited Rome with Caesar and had seen how conquered enemies were treated. She, who had ruled as a living goddess in the tradition of Isis, who had governed a wealthy kingdom for 2 decades through sheer political genius, who had shared beds and birthed children with 2 of the most powerful Romans in history, she would not allow herself to become a spectacle for the Roman mob. On August 12th, in the year 30 before Christ, Cleopatra requested a basket of figs be brought to her chambers. Hidden among the fruits, according to legend, was an asp, a venomous Egyptian cobra whose bite could bring a painless death. She dismissed her servants, keeping only her two most loyal handmaidens, Iras and Charmian. When Octavian's soldiers finally broke into the sealed chamber, they found a chilling scene. Cleopatra lay dead on her golden couch, dressed in her royal regalia, looking as though she were merely sleeping. Iras lay dead at her feet, while Charmian was adjusting the queen's crown one final time before she too collapsed. "Was this well done of your lady?" demanded one of Octavian's men. "Extremely well," Charmian replied with her dying breath, "as befitted the descendant of so many kings." The famous tale of the asp has captivated imaginations for centuries, but modern historians have questioned this account. Some suggest she may have used a more reliable poison, perhaps hidden in a hairpin or ring, as many rulers did in those dangerous times. Others believe Octavian himself may have ordered her death secretly, while maintaining the suicide story to avoid appearing dishonorable. Whatever the truth, Cleopatra's death at the age of 39 marked the end of not just her life, but of an entire era. With her died the last of the Ptolemaic dynasty that had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. More significantly, Egypt, the oldest continuous civilization in the Mediterranean world, lost its independence and became merely another province in Rome's expanding empire. Octavian, soon to be known as Augustus, ordered the execution of Caesarion, Cleopatra's 17-year-old son, with Julius Caesar, eliminating any potential rival with a claim to Caesar's legacy. Her 3 children with Antony were spared, but paraded in chains during Octavian's triumph, before being raised by Antony's abandoned Roman wife, Octavia, a final humiliation that Cleopatra had escaped through death. In her final moments, Cleopatra maintained control of her destiny, denying Rome its greatest spectacle and ensuring that she would be remembered not as a conquered queen, but as a woman who lived and died on her own terms, a true daughter of Egypt to the very end. With Cleopatra's death, the Ptolemaic dynasty that ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries came to a dramatic end. Her beloved Egypt, the land of pyramids and pharaohs, became just another province of Rome. The fate of her children was equally tragic. Her son with Caesar, Caesarion, was executed on Octavian's orders, while her 3 children with Mark Antony were taken to Rome and, in a twist of fate, raised by Antony's former wife, Octavia. The last pharaoh was laid to rest beside her beloved Mark Antony in a tomb whose location remains one of history's greatest mysteries to this day. But Cleopatra was so much more than the seductress that Roman propaganda painted her to be. She was a brilliant stateswoman who fought fiercely to preserve Egypt's independence in a world increasingly dominated by Rome. She played the game of power with the cards she was dealt. Her sharp intellect, magnetic charisma, and unwavering determination. Think about it. If she had succeeded, if Mark Antony had defeated Octavian, the course of world history might have been dramatically different. We might have seen a fusion of East and West, a Greco-Egyptian Roman Empire that could have changed the face of civilization. 2,000 years later, we remain captivated by this extraordinary woman who dared to challenge the conventions of her time. It wasn't her beauty that made her legendary. It was her audacious belief that she could alter the destiny of empires. In a world where women were expected to be silent and submissive, she dared to speak 7 languages, command armies, and challenge the might of Rome itself. If you've enjoyed diving into this fascinating story with me, don't forget to like this video and share it with your history-loving friends. Subscribe to Legacy of Empires for more incredible stories from the ancient world. Who should we explore next? The brilliant strategist Alexander the Great, the ambitious Julius Caesar, the controversial Emperor Nero. Let me know in the comments below who you'd like to learn more about. Until our next historical adventure, remember, history isn't just about dates and events. It's about remarkable individuals who dared to dream big and change the world. And few dreamed bigger than Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt. See you in our next video.